It looked like a war zone. More than 300 federal agents stormed Omaha Motels at dawn, doors smashed in, families screaming, children pulled from locked rooms, and in the chaos boxes of fake visas, piles of drugs, and victims so terrified they didn't even realize they were being rescued. This wasn't just a motel bust. It was the crack in a nationwide trafficking pipeline hiding in plain sight.
So this investigation revealed victims who were forced into sexual activity, living and working in dangerous and unsanitary conditions, and extorted to work in grueling jobs with little to no pay.
But here's the disturbing twist. Traffickers weren't crushed by Trump's crackdowns. Some say they were empowered by them. So the real question is, were the very policies meant to stop crime actually making it easier for traffickers to tighten their grip? And if the signs were hiding in plain sight all along, how did authorities miss it for so long? Let's explore.
This motel and others described in a 65-page affidavit. It lays out in plain language the years of alleged criminal activity that included labor trafficking, described by the FBI as modern-day slavery, sex trafficking, and rampant illicit drug use.
So, it all went down just before 5 in the morning of August 12, 2025. Omaha was still asleep when more than 300 agents, federal, state, and local, swarmed the city. 14 businesses and 2 homes hit all at once. 4 of them were motels. The others were a chain of brow and lash salons, hiding in plain sight at Omaha's busiest malls. And what they found inside was way worse than anyone expected. Kids, 10 of them, forced to work in those hotels. One girl was just 12, scrubbing toilets instead of going to school. And the sickest part? The same motels that used them for labor also charged them rent. Rooms so filthy that cockroaches were crawling over kids as they tried to sleep on bare floors. And they were not the only ones. 17 adults were stuck in the exact same nightmare, working long hours for almost nothing, then being forced to hand their wages right back just to live in those disgusting rooms. One worker put in over 100 hours and barely cleared $400, and when victims couldn't cover their so-called debt, they were pushed further.
They worked there but received no actual pay, and in fact, were often told they owed money for rent. And in order to pay that rent, employees were solicited for sex acts or solicited to steal property, such as retail items like cologne, electronics, clothes, landscaping supplies.
Even regular travelers noticed something was off. Reviews blasted the motels as dirty and dangerous, but for the victims trapped inside, there was no way out. But labor wasn't the only crime happening inside those walls. And what investigators discovered next was even darker. Investigators said other illicit activities were happening in the very same hotels. And in some cases, it wasn't merely overlooked, it was actively encouraged. Hotel management, the very people entrusted with keeping guests safe, often turned a blind eye, or worse, offered protection to the traffickers. Victims were forced to sell themselves, trapped in rooms with no escape. Some were preyed upon by the staff who were supposed to protect them, the front desk clerks, maintenance workers, and even security personnel. The people they should have been able to trust were instead complicit in their exploitation.
So this investigation revealed victims who were forced into sexual activity, living and working in dangerous and unsanitary conditions, and extorted to work in grueling jobs with little to no pay.
And the pattern was heartbreakingly familiar. In cases like these, the victims are almost always women and children. Why? Because traffickers know they are the easiest to control. Women can be exploited for labor and illicit activities, making them more profitable. Children, especially those who are undocumented, orphaned, or from broken homes, are the most vulnerable of all. They can't fight back. They can't simply walk away. Instead, they are silenced through threats, told that their families will suffer if they speak out. Angela, a longtime resident who saw it happening, described it in haunting detail.
In one of the rooms, down at the end, there was the girls. A guy would go in, choose who they wanted. He'd go back in with the pimp, and the pimp would come out and stand by the door while whatever was going on in the room, then it switched.
The image stayed with her, the endless stream of victims, the chilling indifference of the adults around them, the way the system itself seemed powerless to stop it. And what makes this even more disturbing, this wasn't hidden in some dark alley or abandoned warehouse. It was happening in plain sight, behind the doors of buildings that, on the outside, looked like any other hotel. Families checked in for weekend trips. Guests passed through the hallways, completely unaware of what was happening just a few doors away. And for traffickers, these hotels were perfect, cheap, anonymous, always filled with new faces. No one questioned late-night arrivals. No one noticed when housekeeping staff rotated constantly. To outsiders, it looked ordinary. To victims, it was a trap. In Omaha, investigators uncovered exactly that. Court records showed workers being cycled in and out of hotel rooms like shadows. Some arrived from Arizona, already holding paperwork that listed the hotel as their home address. This wasn't sloppy or improvised. It was carefully orchestrated, a pipeline mapped out before the workers had even crossed the border. But here's the thing. People noticed. Neighbors saw the overcrowded rooms, the constant comings and goings, the workers who avoided eye contact and seemed too frightened to speak. They reported it over and over. Hundreds of tips poured into the FBI about those motels.
Several concerned citizens made calls to human trafficking hotlines in this case about child workers and sex trafficking occurring at some of these hotels.
And yet, nothing happened. Not for months, not even for years. Nearly 4 years passed before investigators finally stepped in. By then, the operation had grown far larger than anyone realized. When agents finally dug in, they uncovered a network that stretched far beyond Nebraska. Victims weren't just trafficked for labor, they were transported across state lines, sometimes as far as Washington, to buy fraudulent driver's licenses. Each document cost about $1,000, and those fake IDs allowed the trafficking to continue unchecked. The FBI's Eugene Cowell didn't hold back.
In this case is absolutely atrocious. The idea that criminals believe they can exploit children and other vulnerable individuals in our communities, victimize innocent people, and then hide from justice is unacceptable.
But the horror didn't stop with trafficking alone. Investigators quickly realized these hotels were more than just traps for vulnerable women and children. They were hubs for a sprawling criminal enterprise. Drugs moved through the same hallways where victims were held. Meth, cocaine, and fentanyl flowed openly, with overdoses becoming a terrifyingly common occurrence. One witness described it bluntly.
And then the drug dealing was real bad, and there's a lot of, people coming and going.
But the drugs weren't just fueling profit, they were weaponized. Victims of trafficking have often described how pimps and traffickers would introduce them to meth or opioids, sometimes against their will, then keep them hooked. Once addicted, escape became almost impossible, withdrawal was unbearable, and their traffickers controlled the supply. If you obeyed, you got your fix. If you resisted, you suffered. It's a form of bondage more powerful than chains. One motel was so plagued by overdoses that Narcan, the opioid reversal drug, was kept at the front desk like aspirin. In another, a stairwell was described as littered with needles. Parking lots turned into open-air drug markets where dealers and users operated in plain sight, unbothered by management or police. Even hotel guests noticed. Online reviews mentioned the chaos, sketchy crowds in the parking lots, constant fights, drug use in the hallways. And yet, behind those same doors, the trafficking continued. Victims weren't just trapped by violence and fear. They were chemically shackled, their addictions used as a leash. Which leaves the most disturbing question: how did all of this go on so openly for so long? The answer investigators uncovered was darker than anyone expected, because these traffickers weren't just operating in the shadows, they were being protected by hotel owners, and according to federal prosecutors, even by law enforcement officers who should have been shutting it all down. That protection didn't just allow the trafficking to survive, it made the motels untouchable. In the coordinated raid, investigators arrested 5 members of the same family who had been running 4 hotels like personal crime empires. What they uncovered inside read more like a cartel bust than a motel search. Stacks of cash, safes stuffed with jewelry, assets that spoke to years of exploitation hidden in plain sight. As one official revealed,
We've seized over $500,000 in cash, approximately $65,000 worth of jewelry, and that's just a partial count. And these searches are still ongoing.
And the money was only part of the story. Because the more agents dug, the clearer it became. These weren't just rundown roadside motels where vice and drugs thrived. They were central hubs in a sprawling criminal machine, one that reached far beyond Omaha's city limits. On paper, Trump's administration is cracking down harder than ever on illegal immigration. By May 2025, the White House had set a daily target of 3,000 ICE arrests nationwide. To his supporters, it was proof of law and order. But to traffickers, it was a gift, because fear became their strongest weapon. Imagine crossing an international border in search of a better life. You're undocumented, alone, and headlines scream about ICE raids sweeping through your city. Every knock at the door feels like it could end in deportation. Then someone approaches, a trafficker posing as a savior. They promise work at a motel or a salon, maybe even help with your papers. You're isolated, terrified, and in no position to ask questions. Debt piles up, doors are locked, but quickly it becomes a trap. Exorbitant fees for transport, visa assistance, or housing become debts that can never be repaid. Isolation follows, language barriers, no support network, and constant manipulation. This is how trafficking begins for so many women and children, not in chains, but in fear. And traffickers knew exactly how to weaponize that fear. They understood immigration law better than their victims ever could. They knew most were undocumented or clinging to shaky visas. All it took was a whisper. If you run, ICE will find you, not me. For many survivors, deportation felt worse than staying, because there was nothing to go back to, only war, poverty, or persecution. America was supposed to be a safe place, their last chance. But traffickers twisted that hope into a cage, and the numbers made it clear. In 2023 alone, the National Human Trafficking Hotline logged over 10,000 cases involving nearly 17,000 victims. But experts said that was only a fraction. Most victims never came forward, silenced by debt, fear, and the constant threat of deportation. And this is where the system itself was twisted. There were supposed to be protections, the U visa for crime victims and the T visa for trafficking victims, designed to help people step out of the shadows and cooperate with law enforcement. But under Trump, those protections collapsed. Backlogs exploded, rules tightened, approval rates dropped. Even lawyers warned clients not to apply because the system, meant to save them, could deport them instead. And that's when investigators made a darker discovery. In Omaha, traffickers weren't just scaring victims with immigration law, they were exploiting it for profit. Court records revealed one defendant had staged a fake robbery just to file fraudulent U visa applications. Visas that were supposed to protect survivors were now being hijacked by traffickers to shield themselves. Survivors got nothing, the criminals got cover. And Omaha wasn't alone. Down in Louisiana, the scheme went even deeper. Federal prosecutors indicted 5 men, including 4 current or former police officers, on charges of bribery, visa fraud, and mail fraud. It all unraveled after USCIS flagged suspicious U visa applications. When investigators dug in, they uncovered nearly a decade-long scam, police reports for crimes that never even happened. According to the indictment, officers allegedly fabricated armed robberies on paper so immigrants could qualify for visas. Think about that for a second. The very people sworn to protect the public were instead creating fake paperwork to feed the same trafficking pipeline they were supposed to shut down. And it didn't stop there. Similar scams popped up in other states. In Hingham, Massachusetts, a video went viral of what looked like a robbery in progress, but it was staged.
Immigrant employees are accused of hiring 2 men to create the fake holdups. The goal was that those immigrants could say they were victims of crimes to help booster their applications to stay in the United States.
Chicago saw the same thing. 6 people were arrested for staging armed robberies so victims could apply for U visas. According to the indictment, the scammers were paid thousands of dollars to participate. And scams like this aren't just about paperwork, they carry deadly consequences. In Northwest Houston, a bystander witnessed what looked like an armed robbery at a gas station and opened fire, killing a man named Rashud Scott. Only later did police learn the truth. The robbery had been staged for a U visa. That's the chilling part. From Massachusetts to Chicago to Houston, these weren't random one-off cases. They were coordinated, calculated efforts to exploit a program designed to give vulnerable immigrants safety and stability. And the fallout didn't stop at one state. Louisiana's scandals became a talking point for federal officials under Trump. They used cases like these as proof that the U visa program was broken, calling it mismanaged and ripe for fraud. Shady lawyers, crooked cops, and even the immigrants themselves were blamed for gaming the system. And the people working on the ground told a similar story. Retired Homeland Security investigator Victor Avila recalled seeing stack after stack of U visa requests that raised red flags.
I remember being in El Paso, Texas, investigating these cases and thinking, are all these people actually, were a victim of a crime? And if so, exactly what happened in Louisiana, where's the police report?
But immigration lawyers on the ground told a different story. They said cases like Omaha or Louisiana were the rare exceptions. The danger, they argued, was that by holding up those cases as the norm, the government was actually punishing the very people the U visa was designed to protect.
It's very disheartening because there are so many people that unfortunately do qualify and have been victims of these crimes that you want to ensure hopefully get some sort of relief.
And the fallout landed hardest on the victims themselves. Survivors of real crimes, women trafficked in Omaha, workers beaten and threatened in motels, suddenly found their applications buried under suspicion. Their cases took years longer. Many were denied outright. And while they waited, the same traffickers who exploited them kept cycling new victims through the pipeline. By the time federal agents finally admitted the problem was systemic, the damage had already been done, not just to trust in the program, but to trust in the very institutions meant to protect people. Because if the U visa could be hijacked this easily, if the system could be twisted against the very people it was designed to save, what else was being hidden in plain sight? And here's where it gets scarier. Ordinary people began noticing the same patterns in their own towns: the shady motels, the overcrowded rooms, the workers who barely spoke English and looked too terrified to talk. On Facebook and Reddit, stories started to mirror what investigators had uncovered. One post read, "There's a chain of different Chinese restaurants near me in Atlanta that are run by the same parent company that definitely does this. I've seen the owner twice while eating, and he is always screaming at the staff in Mandarin, and they usually end up crying and begging him, so I assume he is threatening them." This isn't just a headline anymore. It's personal. It's happening in neighborhoods across America. And if this network could operate in plain sight for years, what else is still out there, hiding in the open?